So, good morning, everybody. Today I'll be continuing from where I stopped the last time I picked this up. So it's still the web development track. Today I'll be talking a bit about JavaScript, and I would like to show us a very small app that I built like 2 weeks ago. I used JavaScript, so that's going to give us like a practical outlook on what you can do with JavaScript. So first of all, JavaScript is a scripting programming language. For scripting programming language, you basically have to write them in conjunction with some of them, not all of them. You can write them in conjunction with another language, like a markup language, something like HTML and CSS. And you can also write them on their own, like Python. Python is also another scripting language. So you also have other scripting languages like Ruby, you have PHP as well. So JavaScript is also one of them. JavaScript is both client side and server side. So what that means is you can use it to build on the front end, and you can also use it on the back end. On the front end, you use it like ordinarily, like what they call vanilla JavaScript, just JavaScript. You can use it with HTML and CSS. Then, because of the frameworks and things like React, Angular, and all of that, that's still JavaScript that is working. Then on the server side, you have you have Node.js on the server side. That's where you can use JavaScript on the back end. Basically, use Node.js to build things like APIs. So it's an interpreted language, like Python. Yes, it's an interpreted language. Like JavaScript is an interpreted language. We also have another category. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Compile. Yeah. Then there are some JavaScript frameworks that have to compile because of something like Angular now. Angular uses TypeScript. So the browser does not at this moment understand TypeScript properly. So what is done there is the whenever you finish building, when you finish your work, if you save it, it compiles and compiles and compiles, then it compiles the TypeScript code into JavaScript so that the browser will be able to understand what you want to render. So JavaScript first appeared on the scene in 1993. Then in 1996, it bigger. Became bigger. They first of all created it to make the web pages more interactive, but since then it has become bigger. You can use it on the front end, like I said, you can use it on the back end. They also use it in other applications like Internet of Things as well nowadays. Then in 2010, they had another edition. That was when it became something like what it is nowadays. So they started bringing out more additions, and from 2010 they started coming up with frameworks. Around that time, I think that's when jQuery now became even popular. So because of that, JavaScript has been used to build even better applications. So how do you bring in JavaScript? Like I said, the scripting programming language that you can use in conjunction with things like HTML. So when you want to use it with HTML, you bring it in two ways. One of them is via the script tab, right? That's going to be like at the bottom of your HTML sheet. And you can also use an external script. If it's a CSS now, yeah, I'll say an external style sheet. But in this case, an external scripting page. So basically, you write your JavaScript in another page, and you link it inside of your HTML with this second one. Split. That SRC stands for source. So you are pointing to where the location of the file is. So I want to quickly show us. So so basically with JavaScript you can build You can build a lot of really fun applications, just things to show what I just want to show you this so you understand all of the things I just said. I know I'm not saying it. So what this is doing is feeding on an API. I'm sure a lot of us, some of us would have heard API countless times here. So how it is working, I wrote the normal HTML markup, CSS, I'm using Bootstrap for this, and there's the JavaScript part which does all of the work basically on this. So I'll just show us some of the. Now, if you remember the other day, I talked about HTML, then I talked about the opening tags, how you start with HTML. I also talked about this, yeah, this attribute here, language, English. So, what you're seeing on that page, what you're seeing here, all of this markup was done with this HTML. First off, like I said earlier, I'm feeding from an information coming from an API. Now the API is called Open Weather. So what the API is giving me the weather condition in different areas. So all I just need to do on this page right now is to click here. Once I click here, I enter the city I want and the country where it is located. So what happens is the code runs in the background, it's fetching the information from where from the API. So it's bringing back all of those things and it's rendering it like you're seeing it here. If you remember, when I opened the page, you are seeing this already. Normally, if it was fresh, you will not see any city there except the one that had coded. So what it is using currently is something called local storage. So I'll just show you what the local storage is. A browser application that helps you to keep data on the browser. We have two types of storages in the browser. One is the local storage, one is the session storage. The difference between them is when you close the browser, that particular window, session storage uses the information. But for local storage, if you close the browser and you come back to that particular page is still going to bring back the information that you have concerning that page. So from here, you can see this is already the application. You can see this inside of them. That's local storage. This is inside your browser. As you can see, this is the information that is linked to this particular site. I open this up now. And see Lagos City. So all it just needs is this. It goes back and it fetches the information concerning that city and it shows the weather conditions. And let's dive into the code. So on this part here, like I said, this HTML is just concerned with the way the page looks. The way it looks. So there are three files here that are doing all of the work, bringing the information, rendering it the way you're seeing it. We have the app.js file, we have the weather.js file, the store.js file, yeah, and the first one, the UI.js file. This store.js file is concerned with the storage. That's the local storage that I talked about. So because it's going to be running on the browser, I don't want you to have searched for a particular city now. And when you come back, because the page will just be showing blank if I was not using local storage. The page will just be blank. All of those cities, none of those things will be showing if I was not using this. Now you can also use other things. You can probably be using a server, maybe like Firebase, or maybe you have a backend application. You can be using the server to set the information back on the app whenever you do the page. So JavaScript it also supports object-oriented programming. So what I used in this case, I used classes Although JavaScript is not really a classical language, classes were introduced in JavaScript like recently, and in JavaScript it does not work the same way it works in other languages. So basically, in JavaScript, it's just a syntactic sugar. That's what it's called in JavaScript. It still works the same way objects work. But normally, if you're going to use OOP in JavaScript ordinarily without using the class syntax, what you'll be using is the function. Function, that's what you just use to create the object. So basically, you can have something like, I'm just going to show something real quick. So we'll just have something like function in capital letter. Let's just call it O. So basically, if you want to use this function, you can now go somewhere else and say, uh, you instantiate this. Let's call it novel. So basically, this is just how you can use the function if you don't want to use classes. So that's just a bit about OOP in JavaScript. So as I was saying, I use this particular page now, this file to control the local storage. So this one starts like this. Now I mentioned something about API. This is the particular file that is concerned with the transactions with the particular API. Now, somebody probably has explained this before, but an API is an interface that allows your own application to talk to another application. So think of it this way. There is another application somewhere that is serving me the weather information. So all my application is doing is calling that particular application to give me the information I want. So in this case now, I'm using a get request. We have different kinds of verbs. They call them HTTP verbs. HTTP verbs rather. We have the get, we have the post, we have the put, we have patch, and we have delete. But in this case here, I'm using the get request. This one is a bit, I don't know what's called. It's called async and await. It's one of the most recent releases in JavaScript. ECMAScript 16, I can't remember. Like 2 years ago. So basically, how it works, it just works. First of all, fetches the request. It waits. That's what this await is for. It waits till this one is done. When this is done, then it releases the information for you. So it's returning this information only when the request is done. So that's how this will work. But basically, just get it that it gets request. Now, I'm using fetch. This one is also a new application. There are various ways to make get request. You can use the XHR method. You can also use the fetch method. XHR, how it works is XML HTTP request. That's another method, and it's long but use XHR again. That be more lines. But fetch is shorter. So I'm using fetch. Then this is the URL. That's that API slash API.openweathermap.org and all of that. This is the city, right? This is the Lagos you're saying there. This is the country. If I don't do it this way, the API will not accept my request. You understand? So this is a method that is changing because normally you saw that modal where I clicked to change location. This button here, if I put another city here, let's say Berlin, let's do something like Berlin. And I click on save changes. So that particular method there, this change location, is collecting the city that I entered and the country, then is applying the change right there on the page. That's what that method is doing in that place. Then this other guy here, the app.js, this is This is the one controlling that modal, the modal we saw earlier, the one that I clicked on. So there's something called event listeners in JavaScript. The fact that I click this button and it pops that up is listening for an event. The event in this case is listening to the click event. So on clicking that, it pops this modal up. This is the code here that is doing all of that work. Yeah, this part here. All of this part here. Right? Then we have the UI. What this page is doing is basically collecting all of the information that you enter on this one here. It's collecting the information. When it collects the information, it processes your request. Then it renders this on the page. So what it's concerned about is this, the words, the styling and everything. As you can see here, up here, I'm getting from our HTML, you can see we have some tags here. Oh, I'm generating. Yeah, you can see all of this. W details, W humidity, W feels like, W wind. Yes. So you can see them here. So what I'm doing in this place here, I'm selecting those things from the HTML and I'm using them to render the information, to just render the information that was typed into that particular form input, which is this. The information I'm getting from here, I'm using it to show all of this here. And what you are seeing here, most of the content in that page are dynamically generated, meaning I didn't create them inside of this HTML. I'm using the JavaScript to create them into the HTML. So there are various ways to create the HTML. Like I said before, use JavaScript in conjunction with the HTML. So basically, you can create dynamic content into your HTML with the JavaScript. Uh, so That's basically all. So what the weather app does, like I said earlier, it just fetches information about any city and country you enter, and it shows you the current weather information. That's it. Good. Any questions? Questions? No questions. All right.